Good afternoon and welcome back to Clash Course. My name is Joey Livingston. I'm your host, and Greg Bray is your other host. I am a theist and Greg Bray is an atheist, and we really duke it out during this show, don't we, Greg?
We do. Well, I do.
I also do.
I won't take credit for you in that respect. You have to answer for your own actions.
Okay. So the week before last, we were talking about, we were arguing viciously over a quote by, what was his name?
Epicurus, or I always want to say Epicurus, but it's just U.S. at the end. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Epicurus.
It feels weird saying that.
Read Epicurus's quote to us, Greg.
It is. Well, I think we've recognized that it needs to be prefaced a little bit with.
Just read it. Just read it.
Evil exists.
Just read it.
All right, just read it. I was trying to find it exactly the same wording, but it's is God willing but unable to rid the world of evil? Then he is not omnipotent. If God is able but not willing, he is malevolent. If he is both able and willing, whence cometh evil? And if he is neither willing nor able, why call him God?
All right. So now, tell us once again what we need to preface this with. We are making certain assumptions. We are not arguing. We are not trying to dig or find the original intention of this author. We are simply taking this quote as we believe most people of any philosophical mind today, or the majority of people would take this quote today, which is in the context of the biblical God or some other monotheistic God today. Correct?
Correct. The other part is, of course, it is a argument that only applies to the belief in a monotheistic interventionist omnipotent God, or omnipotent and omni-good God, omnibenevolent or benevolent, because otherwise...
the assumption that God is all good, all loving, all knowing, all powerful.
Right.
And this argument is coming up against that.
Correct.
That's the way we're viewing it. If that wasn't your intention, Epicurus, sorry. Let's read that once again, line by line, and just quickly nix out some of the things that we are not going to talk about. Read the first line.
Okay. Is God willing but unable to rid the world of evil? Then he is not omnipotent.
If he's unwilling...
No, if he's willing but unable.
Willing but unable, then he is not omnipotent.
He's unable to do something.
I agree with that. Okay, so we're not going to talk about that.
Right.
The next line, I think, is the real sticker. So skip and read the third line.
The third line is, if he is both able and willing, whence cometh evil? Why do we have evil?
If he is both able and willing to what?
To rid the world of evil.
To rid the world of evil. He is both able and willing, then why? I kind of disagree with that, so we may touch on that. Go to the next one.
And the last one is, if he is neither willing nor able, why call him God?
Neither willing nor able. Okay. And based upon how we're defining God, I would agree with that statement.
All right.
Okay.
So the biggest hitching point that we've had up to here is the second line. Yeah. And I, at the end of the last show, I tried to posit my interpretation of what malevolence means, but I want to give you the option to open with yours, or to let me.
Okay, so we're going to continue to focus on the second line most of the show, most likely. So read it again.
That is, if God is able but not willing, then he is malevolent.
If he is able but not willing to to rid the world of evil, then he is malevolent. Yes,
Yes.
and I disagree with the mechanics of that statement. If it is coming up against the assumption of the existence of a God who is all-loving and all-powerful and all-knowing, to suggest that the only possibility of him being able but not willing is that he is malevolent, I disagree with that.
And I'm sorry, it wasn't malevolent that we were hitching on. It was evil. That's right. I remember we had to discuss what it means to be
what it means to
evil.
be evil. Okay. Yes. All right. So let's begin that one. Let's begin that discussion. I'm excited.
Now, obviously, you remember we did spend a fair amount of time, I'm just more reminding the audience, talking about or establishing the question of, are we talking about a single case, or is this evil in general, and degrees of evil, right?
Right.
And we're on the same page with
Right.
that
I really
now?
have a hard time with your argument that there are not shades of evil, as if it's evil for Hitler to slaughter millions of Jewish people, but it's not evil for a young kid to conk his brother upside the head with a wood block.
Well, I would argue certainly the latter is not something that I would categorize as evil, but I think that the thing that I thought we had gotten to this, but just to recap then, the point I was trying to make is I think that the syllogism here of this particular sentence is saying that if he is able but not willing, he is malevolent. And before we can even get to that, we have to talk about what evil is. That he would need to be able to prevent it, but not willing. So again, this is discussing the problem of evil, and we have to establish that premise.
Okay.
Evil does exist. It's something that
why don't I do my best within my my spasmodic brain to give you a little while to speak on your position on the concept of evil without interrupting you. It probably won't happen, but let me try.
All right. Well, the problem of evil, of course, we need to establish that evil does exist. And I think that's where you and I had our contention there, was that I think we were trying to define evil for different reasons. Yeah. And that's where it seemed that you and I disagreed. But I think really we do agree that there are certainly many shades of evil.
Yes, but I believe it's impossible to have a completely working definition of evil unless you define it as something along the lines of harmful.
I would agree, but I think that for the purposes of this syllogism, it's saying that evil exists. Now, the question of evil exists, before we can even recognize that premise, we would need to establish empirically that, yes, evil does exist. And therefore, my goal was to find something that can universally be agreed upon as evil, that God should have, if capable and willing, prevented. I think we have to look at this in light of the third line to understand sort of where the second line is going. So if he's both able and willing, why do we have evil? We need to establish that there is evil, and therefore I go with the extreme cases, the Holocaust, pedophilia or child molestation, things that are just horrific and evil, and that's where I define evil for this. The operational definition I'm trying to use is something that is willful, harmful, and has no potential for good. Are you with me?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, that's sort of where I think I need to ask you then, is that an understanding of evil that we could agree upon?
I don't think it's fair to work with that, because you are suggesting that if we can agree upon this, we can solve this problem and Greg wins. And I'm saying that you're leaving out the rest of what is, in my opinion, evil, in which it is much harder to deal with this problem. And I'm saying that you have to, if we use the working definition that evil is harmful, then you must include all that which is harm. You must include Holocaust, you must include murder, you must include revenge, vengeance, disease, a little boy hitting his brother on the head with a block. You must include all of these things and look at them in the context of what I think all theists agree in terms of who God is towards us, and that is our Creator, and therefore, in a sense, our parent.
Well, I would have to. I guess I want to stick with that definition because I think that there's a pretty obvious response to the problem of evil if we're defining evil as only that which is harmful, because there are benefits sometimes to things that have harm. That, for example, we learn from experiencing pain,
Yes.
and therefore learn to avoid these things in the future. We learn compassion and empathy by experiencing similar things to what we see other people do, and also by causing these things and and seeing the reactions.
All kinds of good comes out of almost everything that is harmful. I think
that I think is the key word.
Okay,
there.
but you can't say so. Let's only talk about the things that we can't think of any good that comes out of it. First of all,
that by not doing that, though, we're missing the point of the statement.
I don't think that you would be able to find one single example that you wouldn't be able to find some good that came out of it, girlfriend. But you might be hard pressed too. And at some point, if we did find an example that where nothing good came out of it, we could argue either that's because we just couldn't think of anything, or that this is the one example that now we're going to deal with.
I think that what we need to recognize
Sorry, I called you girlfriend. Sorry.
That's okay. It's appropriate enough. I think that what we need to recognize this one is that Epicurus and most of the people who read this are thinking about acts that are pure, unadulterated evil in a way that it's a guttural feeling. This is an appeal to emotion as much as anything else. Yes, it's a logical appeal, but it appeals to the side of us that says, yes, there are things that are truly horrible, and even things that are intentionally done. I mean, we could talk about random events like earthquakes and volcanoes, but things that are done with intention from one human to another that are very, very, very bad, or things that happen by random chance from one organism to another, like infections and disease. I think that a child getting leukemia is evil. It's not evil by intent in that respect, but if we look at it from a creator God that created things like leukemia, then that is evil, and there's really no potential benefit for that is not, that we would have a net benefit from having it as opposed to not having it. If it simply didn't exist, the world would be a better place. There may be silver linings that we can find. There's always something that you can justify.
There are all kinds of ways to spin that if you assume that this theistic God exists, and there is no way to argue that no good comes out of a child with leukemia. There are clearly good things that come out of that experience, even for the child, if you accept the fact that a theistic God exists. Number one, it brings the family together, strengthens bonds, emphasizes love, brings it out to where that is almost all that is experienced during those moments. If the child survives the leukemia, is a stronger person.
I think we have to work under the assumption that the child doesn't.
I understand, but I'm considering all possibilities. If the child survives, although they've gone through a horrible experience, they have been made a stronger person because of it. And if they die, they go to heaven, which is much better than the trials that they go through on this earth, which make them stronger, but are nevertheless painful.
See, you are right that the heaven aspect does certainly bring about a new complication to this. That we say, then of course they get the opportunity to move on into a.
If you concede that heaven wins this argument, then I will throw it out for the purposes of moving forward.
I think it might be worth revisiting, but for the moment I will concede that makes a huge complication to the argument, because we can then just write off death and suffering as basically just a bump along the road to eternal bliss, and that makes it more difficult to
Okay.
consider.
I
So
agree to throw heaven out. I don't think that it is the one leg that wins this argument. But I do think it's a big help.
yeah,
Go for it.
it certainly, and I will openly admit that it's the problem of evil is made far less problematic when you consider that this life is a temporary life and an eternity of happiness and perfect bliss. Then it's really insignificant in that respect. I mean, anything compared to eternity is insignificant, or any finite thing
Right.
in the lens of the infinite. So yes, that's why I appreciate you throwing that out. But the other thing that I want to really emphasize here is that I truly believe that this argument is one that appeals to the fact that there are things that the world would simply be better without. That if they did not exist, we have to look not just at the potential benefits or ways that things can be garnered. I mean, we can always learn a lesson from something horrible and tragic that happens. It could, in one way, bring a family together. It could do something that is. It could teach the culture, the society about that thing. I mean, there's always a way that human minds are very creative and very good at rationalizing away pain and suffering. But I think to make any valid comparison, we would need to say, is that a net benefit to what it would have been without that event happening?
So let me ask this question, just for the sake of a thought exercise. The idea of genocide is arguably, unless you accept that all the Bible is true, unquestionably, the idea of genocide is arguably a concept of man. Would you agree?
I think so.
Okay.
I guess I'll have to see where you're going with it a little bit, but yes.
you could say, well, the God of the Old Testament commanded his people to kill entire nations and races of people, so he invented genocide. But I'm just saying, I gave you heaven, so go with me for a moment. That genocide
Sure.
is an invention.
Oh, right. Yes, it's an action done by men.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. So,
Yes. Okay. I just wasn't fully understanding where you were going with
all right.
it. So,
So it started as a concept, and even within the past couple of centuries, the idea of the world would be a better place if we got rid of this kind of person, or this race of people, or the people who hold to this religion or philosophy. The world would be a better place if we just destroyed them and got rid of them. Right? That's genocide. That's the concept of genocide.
yeah, primarily.
Yeah.
Yes.
So-
I mean, there's other aspects such as they're occupying the land that we want, that we just want to wipe them out because they're troublesome to us,
Okay.
even if we don't think that they're morally bad. But yeah, that certainly is one reason that genocide has been done.
Okay,
Yes.
so assuming for a moment that genocide is an invention of man, and it started out as a concept that began somewhere along the lines of what I described it, my question to you is, if we had a God who prevented genocide, how would we come to understand that those were bad ideas?
Well, I think that we need to some extent, make an appeal to the nature of the creation in that respect. We are going to accept, again, for the purposes of argument here, that we are a special creation designed by this God. The concept of free will is something that we've been given, but as I love the way that Christopher Maudy, sorry, it's my son running around outside the door here making noise, but he phrased it as, we are limited by our phenomenology. There's things that we can't even consider or come up with doing, or that I guess most people won't ever come up with doing. The average person
Right.
wouldn't even think of. I mean, genocide, maybe they might in the right
But
context.
we did.
but
As a people,
things-
we did.
Right, and I have to say though that the average person would not consider any sort of, say, violent pedophilia or anything. The thought would just never even occur to them, and that, I think, is a way that we could be created to still have free will and have it simply not be within our nature to be capable or inclined towards these thoughts.
Say that last part again.
I think that it's perfectly consistent to have free will and yet not have it be within our nature to be capable and inclined to any or to certain kinds of thoughts.
So you're suggesting that those thoughts are evil.
That I think that you're suggesting that we learn that those thoughts or those actions are evil by seeing them and experiencing them. I'm saying that why would we need to learn that those actions are evil if they just never occurred to anybody?
Okay, so but the implication of what you're saying is that it is evil to allow us to have those thoughts.
Well, perhaps that might be a fair way to restate that. But
Well,
what I'm saying it's malevolent. Perhaps it would be to use.
So
that
there's a
word.
difference between evil and malevolence.
We've not really gotten to that yet. Evil, I have at this point really only applied to actions.
It was an
did-
action for the God to allow us to have those ideas. That was an action. He allowed. It's a verb.
That's a fair point. And I'm certainly can say that if it was within this God's power to simply create us without the ability to ever be inclined to do these sorts of things, and this God, of course, being omniscient, would know that that's a potential outcome of us having these thoughts, and that even to follow your argument logically, that we could not learn that they were bad without having done them, so that they necessarily had to happen for us to even learn that they're bad, then I think that is pretty damning to that creation or that creator as, yes,
Okay.
something that was certainly evil for it to allow us, or malevolent for it to allow us to have.
So my question to you is just to add some clarification here, that you are suggesting that it is evil for a God to allow us to have ideas about genocide, but it is not evil for a child to actually bang his brother on the head.
I have difficulty with it's not evil because we can it defines the evil. There might be a small degree of evil behind
Just
it, but
a
no,
drop.
realistically, I don't think that is evil. In the way that I tried to operationally define it as something for which there is no net benefit. It is evil because genocide is bad, it's wrong, it's always bad, it's always wrong, and there's no potential for us to
Can we
benefit.
agree that the more evil that you have, the less net benefit that comes out of it? And the less evil that you have, the more net benefit comes out of it. Can we agree on that?
I'm not sure.
It is clearly harmful for a child to bang his brother on the head, but there's a lot of good that comes out of that experience. And it
Right,
is
minor acts of evil have
And
much
it is-
more potential for positive.
So
and
let,
I think
let,
that
let me
might
finish
be
my
how-
point. It
yeah,
is
fine.
clearly evil for Adolf Hitler to kill millions of Jewish people, and it is super evil, and there is very little net benefit that comes out of that experience.
I would argue that there is not a net benefit.
There is clearly net benefit.
There
There is benefit.
but not net. Again, there's
Well,
benefit.
Okay.
There are
all right.
benefits, but they
Throw
are
out
not
the
a
word.
net.
Throw out the word
a
net. I was just trying to sound smart.
That's the argument
I'm
that
just trying to
I'm
sound
making.
smart.
How I'm trying to define evil is that things that have a net negative effect, when we consider all of the positives from
Okay.
them and all of the
Okay.
negatives,
Fair enough.
it is net negative.
Let me start again without saying the word net.
Okay.
If a child bangs his brother on the head, there is very little evil there and a lot of benefit. If Adolf Hitler kills millions of Jewish people, there is a ton of evil there and very little benefit.
Correct. Yes.
It's a sliding scale that works almost in tandem with each other. The more evil you have, the less benefit.
I I think we might be bordering on tautology with that one. But yes, with how I'm trying to define evil, that's almost becoming a
But something
self-
good came out of the Holocaust. The ideas
Sure.
of genocide. I mean, do I wish the Holocaust happened? Absolutely not. But they happened, and all of these people who thought, oh, the Jews are bad and God hates them and the world would be a better place without them, had their ideas brought to fruition by one man and his ability to lead the minds of unthinking people to killing all these innocent people. And through that experience, all the people who would have never carried their ideas out, a lot of those people said, oh, that was a really bad idea.
Right. I mean, sometimes being faced with the reality of the thoughts that you have or the ideas that you have is far more powerful of a learning experience than any amount of discussion could ever be.
Right.
I can certainly grant that, yes.
So my point is that I think it is misleading for you to continue to force the issue of not accepting the idea of a gradient of evil, because
I'm not stopping, and I'm not saying that there's no such thing as a gradient of evil. Okay. I think that's where we're having confusion here. Is that I'm saying that there are things, regardless of if there's degrees of evil and a gradient of evil. I think the moment that you reach net negativity, that there is less benefit than there is evil or harm from it, that is what we would best describe as evil. I think we've been using evil sort of in two definitions here. I'd like to separate it more into harm and benefit. Yes, there's plenty of things that harm, but when the harm outweighs the benefit, that's where I start to define something as evil.
Okay. So now let's spend a little bit of time, if you don't mind, talking about the idea of free will.
All right.
Okay. At what point should this hypothetical God limit our free will?
I don't know.
At that point where there is technically less net benefit or no net benefit, is that where our free will should be stopped?
I don't know. But what I will say is, just to avoid something that is going to come up, is we are speaking of an omniscient and omnipotent creator in this situation. So even if we cannot quantify when that would happen, we have to assume that this God certainly could make the measurement as to when there is a net negative and net positive.
I'm not asking you to make.
I know.
I'm not asking you to make an actual choice.
I'm just covering that first before I answer that. Is that can we agree on that? That if there is such
God
a point,
God can
God
quantify
would
it.
certainly be
Sure.
capable of recognizing it.
Sure.
Okay. Then I can say that even though I don't know where that point might be, that I could certainly see an argument being made for when that happens, or for that being the right time to do it. But even if that's not the right time to do it, even if we had to argue on where to place the marker, where to draw the line in the sand, I think that there certainly should be one. Even if it comes down to the point where there is 100 to 1 or 99 to 1, 1% benefit and 99% harm, I could certainly see that being a great point to draw that line, or 2% benefit. We may not be able to decide where that line should be, but if we can decide that there should be a line, I think that the argument that Epicurus made is completely valid.
Now, when God limits our free will, is He limiting our ability to perform the actions or to even have the ideas?
Could be either. I think that
No, I'm
a God
asking you.
capable of creating us specially, well, and I'm saying that either one would be a perfectly acceptable answer to this question, that a God creating us could simply create us in a way that we would not be inclined to do these things, and therefore I would like to reject the notion of free will, because will implies that anything can be thought of and done. We are limited by our brains, our phenomenology, our experiences. So I can no more think of a new color or a new sound than something that falls within the frequencies I'm capable of seeing or hearing.
I can.
So
I can do that.
you can think of sounds that are outside the
Absolutely. Yeah, sounds. I think, when I look at a piano and I think of the major keys and the sharps and the flats, I've always in my mind I've imagined the sounds in between those notes.
But the sounds in between are within the frequencies we can hear. What I'm saying is something outside. We cannot imagine the sound that a dog.
No.
Dog.
We cannot hear them. We can't imagine.
I don't think that we can even imagine it. Just like we cannot imagine what ultraviolet light looks like.
I can imagine what an ultraviolet light looks like.
Well, I shouldn't say we can't imagine it. We cannot. When we do imagine it, we will be limited by what we already know, so it will not be a represent. It will not. We could never, through sheer thought, learn what it actually looks like or feels like,
Okay.
Or sounds like.
All right.
By using our imagination. We could imagine
Right.
ways that it might be, but all of those are going to be is a way, something that is a color that we're familiar with, and we're convincing ourselves that it's exaggerated in some way.
Okay.
Our brains are not capable of imagining colors that we are not capable of seeing.
All right. That's not really worth a road worth going down, and I think I would end up agreeing with you. But
So the
but I
point I'm
have to
making-
ask.
yeah.
So a moment ago I asked you if it's okay for God to limit our free will. Whether I asked you, should He do it by limiting our actions or by limiting our thoughts? And you said either would be okay. I really wanted you to choose one so that we could go down that path. So since you,
Well, and I'm happy to choose either. As I'm saying, is since either is an acceptable answer, I am happy to defend either one. Which one would you like to attack more?
okay, so let's attack the harder one. I think the harder one is that He should limit our thoughts, because if He limits our actions, then he is actually preventing us. He's actually restricting our abilities to learn. I think in either case.
Do you think it's harder to?
I think in either case, God is restricting our ability to learn.
Sure, but also that's the reason I think it's much easier for me to argue that the thoughts is a area we can recognize. Because,
I said it was harder because it's harder for me.
right, it's harder for you, right?
Right. Okay.
So yes,
So if He limits our thoughts, then you can argue that that there are thoughts already at which we have been limited, right? Like there are things
correct.
that we
Yeah,
cannot
that
think.
Those things we're
Okay.
not capable of thinking. Yes.
Okay. But you are arguing that God should create us as a less capable species. That's the
Yes.
solution to this problem.
Yes. If as evil is a thing that exists and a thing that could be prevented, then an omnipotent, omnibenevolent God should have created us with a lesser mental spectrum in which these objectively evil thoughts would not ever even occur to us, that they would not come about. And the reason that I think that's much easier for me to argue is because there's no value to learning about that, even if it's not something that we're even capable of thinking of. That the only reason we would need to learn not to do the actions is if we have the thoughts. So there's no value to learning about it if it's not something we can even consider. In the same way that there's no value for us to learn what it's like to be a virus infecting a cell from a personal perspective. It might be a terrible example, but there's things that simply we are not capable of even considering. They're really not. There would not be any value for us, obviously, by definition, to even try thinking about them or to
Okay.
learn about them.
Can you hear
We're
me,
not
Greg?
capable of doing so.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Greg?
Now I-
Check, check. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. My lapel went dead. They had to switch it.
Okay.
So I missed half of what you said, but that's okay. I don't think any of it was important. Let me just ask you this question. It sounds like what you're saying, and this is the question I've been dying to ask, but I couldn't interrupt you because of battery problems. Is this: you're saying that the solution to the problem of evil is for God to stunt our evolution?
I guess in a way, yes, that is certainly a way to do it. And I think that's begging the question on evolution a bit. I mean, if are we accepting that humans are
Our
divinely
ability
directed
to get smarter
or-
and smarter and smarter, you're saying God should cap that at some point.
Well, I think that's a teleological understanding of.
And he really should cap it way back because it was way before we even were able to understand how to read, way before we were understood how to be civilized, way before we understood how to bonk somebody over the head to keep them from getting our food. A long time ago, before we even understood the concept of how a stick can capture ants so we can eat it, way back, he should have limited our ability to think.
Sure. I am going to argue, though, or going to have to point out at least, that when we make such a teleological argument that we're limiting our evolution, it is as though our evolution has a goal. And that's obviously the theistic evolution would be where we have to go from then, correct?
Don't talk down to me.
Divinely guided evolution.
Don't dare talk down to me.
Okay. I'm confused. Is that where we would have to be?
Well, you're suggesting that the idea of evolution where we can any direction, whether up or down, smarter or dumber, bigger or smaller, that evolution does not have a direction. That's what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's.
So
but I'm saying then I'm asking for the purposes of this conversation. Are we assuming that evolution does have a direction?
Well, let me take away the word evolution for a moment. Let me back up. Take the word. I gave you heaven, and you owe me a lot.
I understand on that.
So let's back it up. I'm going to take
Well,
take
that's
out
what
the
I'm
word
asking
evolution.
here.
Just say
Are we making an assumption?
You're saying that God should not allow us to get smarter and smarter. That He should have capped our intelligence way back.
No, not at all. I'm not saying that he should have capped our intelligence. I'm saying he should have capped the spectrum to which our intelligence could reach.
To what? What can I know?
Or not necessarily capped.
Can I know how to read?
Restricted.
Can I know how to
Sure.
read? Can I understand logic?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can I understand survival?
Yes.
Okay. How can you separate murder from the survival of the human species?
It's a difficult one, but I'm not omnipotent, nor am I omniscient.
Clearly not. Clearly not.
That's not necessary for me to be able to describe how. If I can simply say that it certainly would be within the power of an omnipotent God, would it not?
Only if you say that God has the ability to do things that are not within the bounds of logic.
Sure. Well, let's then take a look, even to appeal to the Bible here.
Wait a minute. Do you want to say that God has the ability to work outside of the bounds of logic?
I think that is sort of a given when we're talking about an omnipotent God.
Then you win, because this whole debate works on logic. If you're saying that God can work outside of the bounds of logic, then you win. But I also win.
That's a fair point. What I'm saying here, I guess, is that if there is a way in which humans can be restricted, and I don't know that as far as our thought goes, then it would have been better for God to have restricted our thought than to ever allow us to have these thoughts that we would therefore need to learn from. If that is not possible, we can move on to the actions.
Okay,
This is sort of a
but
dependent.
I really think you have to concede my point that if we conclude, if we take the step that this all-powerful God, that his power goes outside of the bounds of logic, then it is possible for both of us to win this argument
Oh,
completely.
absolutely. I'm sorry. I do certainly concede that.
Okay,
And,
so we
and that's
must.
where I tried to back it up to say if it is possible
Okay,
to do that logically, if there is a way that it can be done, an omniscient and omnipotent God would be aware of that way and be capable of doing it. If not, we would need to then rule out this as a possibility and move on to actions. If you can establish
I
that
think
it
you're
cannot
really.
be done either,
I think
then you've won.
I think you're really working in a narrow corner now if you're going to argue that God can give us the intelligence to understand the concepts of survival, but not understand the concepts of murder.
Well, I think that it's really not that big of a leap, though, for us to simply be, even if it's by divine intervention, restricted from having those thoughts. A specific, I mean, this is an omnipotent God that is not restricted by the time. So anytime one of those thoughts is about to occur or could potentially occur, or our line of reasoning would go there, an omnipotent God could certainly intervene and simply distract us.
I mean, do I get to understand that that it's better for me to have more food than it is for me to have less food?
Sure. And
Okay.
and what you're asking is, are there premises that we could theoretically put together in a way
I think
that
that
we
there
would
are
therefore
millions
make
of
these
premises.
conclusions?
I think that there are
Right.
millions of premises that you would have to concede that I get to have to be a thinking person, but you would also have to concede lead to the ideas that ultimately lead to evil.
I could certainly say that they can be. And I mean, in this respect, we're talking about genocide specifically, but we can generalize if you'd like.
I mean,
I'm saying that even if we grant that we have the ability to know all of these premises, it's certainly within an omnipotent and omniscient God's power to intervene before we combine these premises in such
okay.
a way
But
that
my
we
ability to understand that more food for me is better than less food for me also is an idea that the person next to me has, and then do I also get to understand that if I have some of my neighbor's food, that I have more food? If I get to understand that, then do I get to understand that I can take some of my neighbor's food if I have permission? Do I get to understand that if they don't give me permission, I could still choose to take it? And do they get to understand that now they have less food?
Well, Joey,
and
I
that's
think
bad?
once again we're entering into the realm that I tried to cover by saying that I might not be able to make
But
this
I want our viewers to
distinction
understand
delineation.
I want our viewers to understand exactly what we're taking away when you say that God now has the ability to restrict our ability to get smarter. I
Well,
mean,
what I'm saying though is I'm
that's
appealing
restricting a
back
lot.
I'm appealing back to the things that we would consider. The average person, I don't think, would look at a situation and say, "I'm short on food," or even the genocide is a great example because
No, wait.
there
Finish
are.
your point. Finish your point. I love where
So
you were going
I don't
with
think
that.
the average person would think, "I'm short on food. My neighbor has food. I should murder my neighbor and take their food." I don't think that is even a thought that would occur.
No, but they
to
might
most
think
people.
I can take my neighbor's food, which
Right.
then leads the neighbor to think I have less food, which then leads them to think, what can I do about it? I could take it back, and then that leads the person who took it back
But you're begging the question here and assuming that because I've already established or tried to that there are things that we can, if there's a net benefit to the learning, then it's okay. We can still have these. It's at the point only when there's no net benefit. And if we could have these thoughts that, my neighbor has food, I want that food, I can take that food. If there's still a net benefit that we can learn from that, or even attempting to act upon that,
I think
it's when the thought would only lead to a net harm, and we can no longer gain any benefit from it, is when we become capable of even considering it, even fathoming the idea in
and
the
I
way
think
that I
it's-
don't think the average person would ever even consider raping somebody or murdering somebody to get what they want. I think that that is concepts that don't even enter into the average person's
I
mind.
think it's bizarre and ridiculous for you to suggest that we can have logic that leads up to something until there's no net benefit, and then somehow our ability to stop putting pieces together must cease to exist. We're just talking about building blocks here. We're talking about
Sure.
tools
Why-
that have been. God put in my hand a stick, and my ability to understand that I can use that stick to gather ants is the same ability that I have to understand that I can use that stick to beat a monkey to death and eat it.
Well, I think though, when you're considering logic, we have to have the premises have to have been already established in some way. For us to consider murder as an option, we would need to even know that that is an option to consider. Otherwise, that is a creative act.
I think
on our
everybody.
part. We are
You keep
having
saying-
this idea.
You keep saying I don't think the average person would think about this, and I beg to differ with you. I think everybody at some point comes to the realization that these things are possible.
Oh, well, sure, but we're in a world where those things are possible, and
That's
we're
the point.
perfectly familiar with those. I'm asking about let's take a fable here and talk about Cain and Abel.
Wait just a minute. Just a moment ago, you argued that God should cap off these ideas, and your argument was that the average person wouldn't think about doing these things. And I'm saying most people, probably all people, come to the conclusion that these things are possible. And then a
What I
while
mean by
back,
think about
then
doing
a
them
while
is consider
back,
them as an option.
we were arguing about how genocide started out as an idea, and that the actual act of genocide taught us how horrible that was. And I'm trying to understand where in this equation you're suggesting that we
this
can
fable
not
will
have
help.
these ideas.
This, I think, will help
you've got 3
to
minutes.
elucidate this. Cain and Abel, right? I think that we can both agree that that is not a literal story, but it is a parable. So when we consider Cain and Abel as a story, we are thinking of a hypothetical world in which murder had never happened. Nobody had ever thought of murder. Nobody had ever seen murder. Nobody had ever committed murder. And Cain gets jealous of Abel because God is happier with his sacrifice. Cain gets an idea. For the first time in human history, the thought occurs to Cain, I should kill him.
That isn't
And he
the thought.
acts
That is
upon
not the thought that occurred to him. It wasn't
What-
out
what
of the
thought
blue.
occurred?
It was not out of the blue. The thought that occurred to him was, I want God to love me.
I think
The
that,
thought that
we
occurred to
could
him
go down
was,
that rabbit hole
God
if you want,
loves,
but eventually it leads
God
to the
loves
thought.
Abel more than me. I want him to love me the most. That was the inception.
But no, these are premises that are there. The conclusion that he drew was, therefore, I should kill Abel. Nobody had ever killed
but my
before.
question is Cain allowed to have the thought, God doesn't love me as much as Abel, I want him to love me more? Is he allowed to have that thought?
Sure.
Okay.
Let me finish the example here, or I guess what I'm getting to is that at some point, Cain gets the idea in his head. He gets this sudden revelation. Oh my God, if I kill him, if I end his life, it is the solution to my problem. This is a creative event. He has no premise for that or no experience. This has never been done before. So he got a fresh, brand new idea that has never happened. And at that point, God, or the moment before that point came around, God could have intervened and stopped the idea from even entering his head and given him a different idea. Like, I should talk to him.
So God should just infinitely distract us.
Or infinitely give us a better solution. Just give us more ideas.
But we're
talking
allowed to
about
have the
ideas.
idea. Okay, we're out of time. I think that from now on, when we have these arguments, we should stop at the half-hour mark and consider giving closing statements, because I would really like to give a closing statement on this. I think you've argued yourself into a corner, and there's no way your argument makes sense. But I'm going to allow you to have the last word. You got all of 15 seconds. We're completely out of time.
My last word here is that if there is a omniscient, omnibenevolent, can't even say it, all good, all loving, all powerful God, that God could certainly and should certainly have prevented us from atrocious acts that have more harm than benefit to some degree or another, even if we can't determine where that is. And if that God has knowingly chosen not to do that, and that line does actually exist, then that God is either not omnipotent, not omnibenevolent, or should not be worshipped as a God, because that is a...
You're practically arguing that God should be a book burner.
I think that you are looking at it from a deleterious historical perspective, in that we already have all this information, but this is coming from the past and going through the future.
All right.
That God could have stopped us from ever even starting these things.
All right. I had a blast. I love you. Please tell me you love me still.
I love you still.
We'll see you next week on Clash Course.